Hello and welcome to another Autism Spectrum Disorder After School special. Thank you for joining us again. This is session 7, and we will be focusing on Gestalt language processing, and this session will be led by one of our zone SLPs, Nicole Shansky. So as usual, we're running these sessions and recording these presentations because we follow the principles of inclusive education as set by Alberta Education. So we anticipate, value, and support diversity and learning differences. We remove barriers within the learner environments. We set high expectations for all learners and know that all learners can learn. We understand learners' strengths and needs. We build capacity, and we collaborate for success. And in Chinook's Edge, we like to do our own thing and add to. We always go above and beyond. So we determined that our vital actions for inclusion are: we build an inclusive mindset, we develop specialized knowledge and skills, we provide specialized student programming, we use data-driven interventions and strategies, and we participate in a collaborative process. So by being here today and by watching this video, you are accomplishing all 5 of these vital actions for inclusion. And so keep that up. This is great. Thank you so much for being here. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our expert of the day, Nicole Shansky, SLP.
Hello, thank you for having me today to talk about a topic that I'm super passionate about. I've been doing a lot of learning about this topic over the last couple of years. I by no means am an actual expert on it, as I'm still learning right along with you, but I'm happy to share what I know and what I can help you with to support these kiddos. So we've learned that when kids are developing language, there's 2 different ways that they can develop and process language and go through stages of acquiring language. We have our analytic language processors, which we would kind of consider normal or typical language development. These are our word babies. So they start out by learning single words first, growing to 2-word combinations, bigger sentences, more complex grammar, as we know, as most kids do. But we've also been learning that there's another type of language development called Gestalt language processing, and it goes through the stages of natural language acquisition. These are intonation babies. So these kids learn language in chunks, and they use a lot of scripts or delayed echolalia. That a lot of them come from media, so YouTube videos, TV shows, songs, things that they have attached some kind of meaning or experiences that they've had that mean something to them. Most of the time it's not literal, but that's what they're using to communicate. And they acquire language naturally through their life experiences. So this is just kind of a rundown of the different stages. As I mentioned, analytic language development goes through, start at single words, 2-word combinations, then they start adding some grammar into that. They use their first bigger sentences, and then they're using complex grammar and full sentences. And our Gestalt language processors are kind of the opposite of that. They start big, and they start with these big chunks, and then they work their way down into being able to isolate single words. It's kind of similar like when you learn a phrase in a different language. So you can say the phrase and you know the intonation pattern, but you might not necessarily know each individual word or what each individual word means, but you know what the entire phrase means. That's very similar to how Gestalt language processors learn language. So in stage 1, they tend to start out with a lot of echolalia, both delayed and immediate, and we'll get into that, what that is a little bit more later. Like I said, most of it's repeated from some form of media. Some examples of some scripts they might use are like, let's get out of here, want some more, things they've picked up from different things that have some kind of meaning for them. And then in stage 2, we call it mitigated gestalt. So that's when they're kind of starting to break apart their gestalt and mix and matching them with other ones. So like if you use the 2 examples from the first stage and mix them up, we could get let's get some more or want out of here. So they're still kind of using those chunks, but you're mixing the chunks up a little bit to have some more flexible language. And then in stage 3, beginning to isolate single words and use some more novel word combinations. And then stage 4, they start adding in some grammar. And stage 5, they're using more complex grammar and self-generated sentences. So as you can see, stage 5 and 6, kind of the end goal is the same for all kids. They just move through the stages differently and at different paces. There's no age per se attached to a stage. So somebody that's in grade 7 or 8 could be a Gestalt language processor and still be in stage 1 or 2. We could have a kindergarten kid who's in stage 4 or 5. So there's no real actual age connected with any of the stages. It's just different for every kid and how they move through the stages. So here's just a little cartoon example of each of the kids and how they develop language. So in the first one, for analytic language, the little girl starts out just saying park, and then she adds on another word, play park, and then she gets to her full sentence, let's go play, or let's go to the park to play. Then with our Gestalt processors, he's using, you can see, let's get ready to rumble. So for him, that means it's time to go. So he's gotten that from something he's watched, and now that's his choice of phrase for let's get ready to go. So then he moves to let's get ready to eat. So he's still using that let's get ready from the first phrase, but he's adding in to eat. So he's starting to show some flexibility there. And then by the end, let's get going to the park. So he's made a new novel utterance. Okay, some signs of Gestalt language processing. So what you might see in some of these kids. Most individuals with ASD are Gestalt language processors. However, not all Gestalt language processors have autism. So lots of kids can have or be Gestalt language processors. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they have autism automatically. However, as I said, most kids with autism are Gestalt language processors, so it's pretty safe to assume. So if kids are using single words that don't really progress to 2 to 3 word combinations, they're probably kind of stuck in stage 1. That's a good sign that they might be a Gestalt language processor. If they're using long scripts, like the last kid that used let's get ready to rumble, as I said, often from TV shows, movies, YouTube. Sometimes they'll use unintelligible strings of language. So what this sounds like is a lot of kind of babbling or jargon. You can't really get out any words, but the intonation is there. So it sounds like they're speaking in like a full sentence, but it's kind of the sounds aren't correct, or they've dropped words, or you're not really exactly sure what they're saying. And they use rich intonation even when the language is unintelligible. And just something to remember is that many of the scripts that Gestalt language processors use, they're tied to specific experiences or feelings. So they don't just necessarily pick out anything because they heard it. There's usually a specific reason for why they've chosen it. So what is echolalia? There's 2 types. We have our immediate echolalia. That's when they repeat pretty much immediately after. They might repeat the whole thing you said, part of what you said, one word. It can serve different purposes. It can be because they know they need to take a turn in the conversation and they don't know what to say. It can just add, giving them a little bit of extra processing time to form a response or an action. Or it could be a stim. They could just like the way it sounds, and that sometimes happens as well. We also have delayed echolalia, which is more commonly used with Gestalt language processors. The child repeats language after a significant delay. So usually they've seen some form of some TV show or something, and they later on are using that script in another scenario to match that same feeling or emotion. What can we do when a child is using echolalia? Don't discourage them or try to stop them. Any child that's using echolalia, whether it's delayed or immediate, it's serving a purpose for that child. We don't always know what that purpose is in the moment, but it's always serving a purpose for them. So we don't want to try to discourage them or stop them from using it. Always acknowledge the child's attempt at communicating. Smile, nod your head, try to repeat back what they said to you. and be a detective and try to figure out what that script might mean for that child. This is harder for us when we don't spend as much time with the child. We don't always know what they're watching or seeing at home. Often parents have an easier time kind of figuring this out, but sometimes we can figure those things out for them. Some more things to do. Try to eliminate questions and commands. This just creates kind of a stress response for some kids. And if they're having a hard time processing the language and they know that they require some sort of answer or action, it can increase frustrations. It can make them dysregulated. So it's easier if we just try to avoid those, especially in the earlier stages. Don't take the scripts or gestalts literally. They usually have a different meaning for the child. So a couple examples. I had a kid in pre-K last year, and she used to say, "It's time for bubble guppies," every time she was really excited. So we figured out that she doesn't want to watch bubble guppies, but when something was happening that she was excited about that made her happy, she was choosing to say, "It's time for bubble guppies." So then we learned to model for her, "It's so exciting," or "I'm so happy." So giving her those scripts too that fit with what she's trying to tell us. I had another kid last year. He was sitting at his desk eating his snack, and then he was all done. So he packed it up and he said to himself, "Please stand for O Canada." And then he got up and went and put the snack away. So was he going to sing O Canada? No, probably not. But that was something that he attached to getting up out of his seat and leaving. So that's what he used. Another example is a kid in kindergarten that we have. He uses a lot of songs to communicate, we just figured out recently. So, for example, he was trying to get out of the gym and there was some doors blocking it, and he started singing "Can't Go Over It" from Going on a Bear Hunt. And he was doing a couple other ones that day. What was the one? Oh, he did, when we presented him with anything new, we were giving him some musical instruments, and he would start singing "What the Fox Say," because he was trying to ask us, "What is it?" So once you kind of figure those things out, and when they're using them more consistently, you can kind of figure out different scripts and language to model for them to help them kind of replace that script with something else. And as always, follow the child's lead, play and model language in natural contexts. So whatever they're interested in, if we try to force them into things, then we're not going to see as much language out of them. How to choose which gestalts to model. So obviously, you want to connect with the speech pathologist if you have a kid that you think may be processing language like this. But something you can do is less talking, more listening, being okay with silence. That's when we're going to see the most language out of some of these kids. So then we can observe what the child is interested in and listen to what language they're already using, so we can shape that and choose which kind of scripts are going to be meaningful to them. Because if we just choose anything that we think is important, if that child isn't attaching meaning to it or doesn't find some kind of importance in it, then they're likely not going to start using it. Using gestalts that start with contractions make it easier to later break those apart and mix and match them. So, for example, if we use "let's go eat," it can become "let's go home," "let's play over here." That "let's" can kind of be transferred to different scripts and different phrases. Some other examples: "What's next?" "It's so fun," "want to play." I try to avoid using pronouns. "Let's" is okay because it's all inclusive of everyone. Using "we" or "I" or "you" is kind of confusing for some kids because they haven't quite understood those concepts yet. So if we want to model phrases that they want to use, we keep it kind of neutral with "let's." It's easier for them. If a child's using scripts from movies, try to figure out what they are trying to communicate and model a gestalt that matches. So like the Bubble Guppies example. We figured out that it meant she was happy or excited, so we gave her "I'm so excited," and we modeled that so she could learn that phrase instead. And how can we model language for our Gestalt language processors? Using, it's called declarative language, so more comments and observations, and avoiding, like I said before, questions and commands until they are in the later stages. Some kids may develop good strategies for answering questions, but often this is just a learned script or response, and they've like kind of a back and forth that they've done already, and it's not necessarily a true answer, or they don't really necessarily understand that it's a question, more of like a script that they're following. And always speak naturally to the child, just like you would when you're talking to your friends. So you can say, want to play, instead of, do you want to play? It's just more natural. It's easier for them to pick up on. Okay, and when you're modeling language, focus on connection over compliance. So we want to make sure that the child's sensory needs are being met, that they're regulated, and that you have a connection with the child. If you don't have a connection with them, if they don't feel comfortable with you, they're probably not going to give you a lot of language or imitate a lot of what you're saying or pick up what you're saying, because they don't have that connection. They just don't want to. So we want to really avoid prompting the child to talk. So telling them, say hello, say goodbye, say this, say that. Yes, the child may repeat what you say, and then everyone gets excited and yay, they said it. But often in these situations, the child has just learned to imitate them. They haven't actually given us a spontaneous response, or nor do they necessarily know that hi means you're greeting somebody. They just know that when this adult says to say something, I say it and they get happy, so I'll do it. But then they're not giving us any spontaneous, flexible language, and then they become very dependent on prompts. So then they're not going to use spontaneous language going forward. And why do we use declarative language instead of questions and commands? Because questions and commands require some kind of a response. And this can put child into a fight or flight response if they don't necessarily know how to respond, if they're dysregulated. Demands can make a child feel inadequate, frustrated, or upset. Declarative language can help empower them to understand the world better and develop self-awareness. And I could do a whole entire presentation just on declarative language, so we won't get into it too much today. I just want to do a quick overview of some examples. So instead of saying the command of get the ball, try an observation. Oh, the ball rolled over there. So you're helping the child connect with the world around them and creating some awareness and helping them be more observant of the world around them. Some other examples, instead of saying, what do you want to drink? I wonder if we should get a drink. Where is the book? Oh, I'm curious where the book went. Put your shoes on. Oh, look, here's the red shoe. Pick up your coat. Oh, I'm noticing your coat is on the floor. Now, this isn't automatically going to make the child do whatever you want every time you say it, but the more you do it, you're going to create less dysregulation with the child that you're working with and more connection, because you're not constantly asking them and requiring them to perform an action for you. And I think that's it. So I know this is recorded, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Tanis or myself, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge. That was wonderful. I think one thing that I learned is about not including or not saying we, or I'm going to go do this, or we should pick up the blocks. Instead, just telling or giving those scripts instead. That was really cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much for listening today. There will be one more session with us, and that will be it for the year. So thank you so much for joining us on this journey through learning about the autism spectrum disorder. And these will be online for you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.